questions raised by listeners. Our informed and informative panel addresses issues with thought, wit, and aplomb. Voted Best of the Web 2 years running. Good day, beautiful, bountiful, beloved, immortal beings, and good-looking people. Now, how can we make the categorical statement that all the thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people that will be watching this at some point in their lives, because this is going to be here forever, are all good-looking? Because by definition, if you tuned into Marriage with Joy, it means you're always looking for and finding the good. That's the definition of a good-looking person. Looking for and finding the good. And we have two remarkably beautiful, wonderful people here that are always looking for the good. We have fabulous Maura Sweeney, the ambassador of happiness. And we have, and then she's holding down the anchor in Florida. And up in the far left-hand corner, I'm not talking about politics, I'm just talking about geography, is wonderful Dr. Diane Medved with the Washington area. She's on an island, but we won't discuss that. It's not Orcas, by the way. And here we are in the middle of one of the most visited places in the entire world, right outside of Las Vegas, ta-da, short hair, in Henderson, Nevada. And of course, we do have Lori McDermott, the wife expert, who will be joining us, but she's late. And we won't make fun of her being late because that would not be nice, but it goes with territory. Okay, we're going to be discussing something fascinating today. I have, I would say, in excess of 362 emails. And when I say excess, because I stopped counting after 362, and we keep getting more. And in this particular week, for whatever reason, we're now in November of the year 2022. There were three major discussions and questions that people are asking. One has to do with marriage and the desire not to be married. I'm not talking about divorce, but the desire not to be married. Another one has to do with race when it comes to marriage, different races of people. And the third has to do with gender. Now, we are very topical because this particular webinar discussing marriage, we're now in our second year, thank God. We are really on the pulse of the society. I mean, there's a number of people, commentators on the pop culture, as wonderful Michael Medved would say, that discuss marriage every once in a while. We're dedicated to it on this particular show. And people appreciate that, by the way, because it's just all about marriage, and it does have an edge, and it does have an agenda. Our agenda is that marriage is one of the most, if not the most, positive, purposeful, powerful, pleasant avenues for gaining greater orientation towards joy in one's life. It's again, not the only way of getting joy in one's life, but it is a pathway that once you enter into it with a significant other, you have the ability to transcend self. And in my humble opinion, that's a great definition of joy. Is the ability to transcend self, or at the very least, to recognize who you are and, how should we say it, smooth out the rough edges. Now, we know that we've discussed many times that I love working with words and acronyms. Joy is a fabulous acronym that stands for Journey of You. So with that in mind, as opposed to somebody just running around the street saying, yeah, joy, we're talking about the journey of you becoming the best you possible. I'm going to bring up one of the questions that was, I tell you, over 100 times. And I'm going to reframe these different inputs to talk about a word that I looked up because it was coming up all too frequently. And it was about something called the hatred of marriage. And there's a word for it. Now, by the way, I find it a funny word only because I love languages. One of my ideas and before the end of life is to actually study Greek. Not just to read it, not just to know some of the derivations, but to really actually be able to read Greek. I'd like to do it. Instead of saying it's Greek to me, I'd like to be able to say it's Greek to me. I can read it. By the way, Maura, didn't you say that you live near a very large Greek community?
We do. First of all, we have a lot of Greek neighbors here in Clearwater, but not far from us in Tarpon Spring, it's a huge Greek community.
I think, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, I interviewed somebody a number of years ago who told me that that community or that whole area has, I think, the largest Greek population outside of Athens. I mean, outside of Greece.
I think you may be right about that.
Okay, so that's one of my things. Anyway, I'm fascinated by derivations of words. So in Greek, miso is the root of the word. Well, we use the word hatred or hate. Unlike miso soup, you can I can hear a sharp kid say when the parents give a bowl of soup, said miso soup. Hey, soup. Okay, that was just a funny just thing. Okay, because it's so common. Anyway, so I looked up, and I think most of us are familiar with some words like being a misanthrope or misogyny or misandry. Hatred of men, hatred of women. It's like, but I didn't know even the word misogamy, misogamy, the hatred of marriage. Now, we're not talking about, gee, I don't want to get married. We're talking about people, the hatred of marriage. I didn't realize that it's visceral for a lot of people. I'm naive, okay, I admit. And in studying certain things in preparation for what we're doing and asking these questions, I'm going to posit a few pieces of data, and just to make us aware, and obviously our listening audience, about who we are in the United States, because this does not apply worldwide, even though there are a number of cultures that this does apply to. But from the United States of America and certain Western European civilizations tend to take their orientation of marriage from a biblical perspective, mostly Old Testament. And interestingly enough, in the Bible, there are only 3 or 4 places where it even talks about marriage. The first one actually being in Genesis, in the early part of Genesis, when one of the patriarchs named Jacob marries 2 sisters, one named Leah and the other named Rachel. And then he marries 2 other sisters, Bilhah and Zilpah. So he marries 4 wives. So marriage is looked upon as a benefit, and in this case, polygamy. We won't go there for the moment. That may be another session. But there's another major time that it's mentioned in the Bible is the parents of Moses, or the future Moses. But it doesn't mention any names, just says a man takes a woman. Okay. The only other time that it mentions specifically people getting married was when a man named Boaz marries somebody named Ruth. Now, Ruth is one of the most famous people in the world because she was the progenitor of King David and eventually the Messiah. And since we are already in November, we can talk about, December and Messiah and all kinds of things that come out of that Ruthian situation. And by the way, as a complete aside, long introduction, but I think it's interesting. We have the term ruthless in English, right? Now, ruthless about somebody is literally someone who lacks lacks that kindness attitude. Oh, we're so happy. I didn't mean to speak ruthless about wonderful Lori, because she is a Ruth. Good, wonderful, heart and soul. So we're talking, just give you a quick update, wonderful Lori. You can hear the replay actually, along with anybody else who wants to. We're talking about marriage, and for good or ill in this particular session, because there were so many questions about, we're talking about the Greek word misogamy, which stands for misogamy. Miso in Greek means hatred, and gamy stands for marriage. So the hatred of marriage. We're not talking about people who said, I don't want to get married. We're talking about the hatred of marriage. And I'm just waxing a little bit eloquent, somewhat, a little bit long-winded, but only because I want to set the stage for something. And we just mentioned that in the Bible, there are only a few times that marriage is even mentioned. But the Bible is the source of marriage for Western civilization. It's only mentioned a few times, but it is considered a good by definition. This is really important for our orientation. And I say it because I did another little bit more data. And interesting enough, I went back to 1990. I mean, I wanted to go back to 1960, but 1960 is so ancient that aside from me, nobody else here, and certainly most of our listeners are that age, so we won't even discuss it. But I went back to 1990 and asked, I asked the search engine, what was the rate of marriage in 1990, which is only 30 plus years ago? And 9.8 per thousand, 9.8 people per thousand get married. And then I asked, what's the rate of marriage today? Well, put on your seatbelts, kids. 5.1.
Wow.
In other words, the decline is not this, it's this. And it's in such a place today that there's a difficulty when it comes to three things that marriage produces. One of them, of course, is, in our opinion, joy and happiness. The second one is progeny. I mean, that's a benefit of marriage. We are at a point in the United States of America where we're just about at or below replacement population. Replacement needs 2.1 children per couple, or somehow getting 2.1 more new children. We're just at the edge or below. There are some countries like Japan, which are way below. They're in the 1.4, 1.3, means there will not be wasn't that there won't be any Japanese in 100 years, but they will have a much diminished population. And the same thing in Russia. Russia is about 1.1. It's a not beneficial phenomenon for the world. You know, it's also very funny. I'm going to stop in just a moment and ask everybody else to talk. But we just hit, and whoever keeps count of these things, 8 billion people. 8 billion people on a planet, which 250 years ago, when these famous people, Malthus and Ricardo, were writing their famous tracts that say the world is coming to an end, we can't feed it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There weren't even 1 billion people on the planet. Now we're at 8 billion, and guess what? We can feed people. There is enough food and there is enough water. It's a distribution issue. It's not a production issue. My third point is, though, that the movement away from marriage is not just because there's more gender equality, there's more respect men to women and vice versa, and you need two people making incomes. It's more about a cultivated anger against the institution. I say cultivated because this is not the first time in history, thank God, that this phenomenon existed. And therefore, there's a hope that it can be reversed. The first time in history that this happened was just after the French Revolution. The French Revolution, the people who conducted the French Revolution hated the church so much that they translated that hatred for the church into the hatred for marriage. They did everything in their power, in addition to killing people by the tens of thousands. I mean, that's what the French Revolution produced, as opposed to the American Revolution. They hated the institution of marriage so much that they made it beneficial not to marry. So this is not the first time in history, but it is not a good trend if you really want to have a history. It goes to the question of what is marriage, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to now reframe the question and make a statement. So the statement I'll do first. In my humble opinion, the key factor in marriage success, which we call marriage with joy, remember, joy stands for journey of you. The key factor in marriage with joy is a W word. And the W word is wisdom. You either need wisdom going in, which most people don't have, or you develop wisdom, which is a result of marriage. In other words, the benefit of marriage is you get beyond self because there's somebody else there that you care enough about. Forget the word love for the moment. that you're willing to understand that by smoothing out your rough edges, you gain and you give. And that's something to me irreplaceable. So I'm going to pose the question. We're going to start with Diane, as we always do. And she's our leadoff batter in the World Series of Life. And you like that one? I thought that was pretty good. And we're going to ask you, Diane. Diane, in your opinion, as doctor of psychology, author, mother, a grandmother, and happily married for decades to a wonderful fellow who I know personally, and with lots of friends and family. In your opinion, why do you think that, if you say you disagree, that's okay. Why do you think that this hatred of marriage exists at this particular time?
Okay, I do disagree. I don't think that there is a hatred of marriage. I think that the necessity of marriage has gone away. And so many people are choosing to get the benefits of marriage, the journey of youth, without it being a we. In other words, they are combining and they're having families and in some cases living together for decades successfully and feeling happy about it without the benefit of marriage. Now, is that a good thing? I think it's a bad thing, but so many people have been hurt by divorce. I've written 2 books on divorce. I've written a book on deciding about getting married. I've written a book on families with Vice President Quayle, believe it or not. I've had a lot of experience analyzing this, and I've seen people still desperate for the benefits of marriage, which are a combining with someone else. But the fear is not of marriage. The fear is of losing oneself, of one's own independence, of one's feeling like you are valued and valuable for yourself as opposed to being part of a couple or part of someone else. And I think our culture has become permissive enough that people now can be totally respected in a way they couldn't 50 years ago and beyond, while being not married. They can have children without being married, even without a spouse or whatever. I'm not talking about, I'm saying that many women can even have children with artificial insemination, not even knowing who the father could be.
I want to interrupt just a moment. Does somebody have something in the background? I'm hearing that. Lori, do you have some? Is there anything happening in your background?
I heard that and I put it in our chat. It sounds like there's someone in the background speaking.
Okay. All right. Just listen around. So thank you, Diane. I just want to please continue. So yes, people can have test tube babies, but in the full sense of test tube babies.
They can get all the benefits of marriage without being married. So I don't think there's a hatred of marriage. I think that there is a diminishment of the value and importance of marriage, so that it doesn't really matter that much. Now, I think there are many people want it because they desire to have that permanence of a lifelong commitment. And I think it's better for the society. I think it's better for each individual as an individual person. And it's better for an entity that is created by the two of them called the couple. And that cannot be done as easily without the institution of marriage. And what is the institution of marriage? It is a couple coming together asking for the witnessing of their union, the legitimacy of their union in a societal sense, in a way that other people see them. This is my husband. This is my wife. Now, you can go to a party and you can say, this is Joe. And that's perfectly fine. And you don't have to be married. And in our culture now, the respect will be there. I think it's great that our culture is moving toward respecting individuals as people separately for who they are and appreciating them as individuals for who they are. But I think we lose something when we don't have also the entity of the couple. And the reason why that's especially important is as a model for children. Children need the security of having parents They love each other in a way that is beyond the moment, that is beyond the fight that's going on right now, that they will not have to worry about their parents separating because they know that their parents are bound together in something they chose to do called marriage. And so I think the reason why we've gone away from marriage is the prevalence of divorce, which has peaked in 1981. It's gone down a little bit, but people who are raised in families with divorce often are afraid of having to go through that themselves, or of setting themselves up for the kind of pain that they went through as children, or having children who would have to go through that. The idea of having two homes, a mommy's and a daddy's home. Divorce has caused a lot of reticence to marry. And I think that's a shame. And I'm hoping that as time goes on, it will be like a wave, that we've lost something with marriage, but that as time heals, we will be able to regain that and revalue the joys of marriage that come to the individuals, and this special entity that can only be found when there is this lifelong commitment. I can tell you in my situation, you're right. My husband and I will have been married. We got married January 85. You were there, Barry. How many years is that?
37 years.
Okay. So the point being that when he got cancer, I didn't have any thought that I would leave, or any thought that I wouldn't be there for him. And I know that's true for Naomi, for you, and that it's a commitment that is your soulmate. And if you can make that kind of commitment of having a soulmate and believing that this person is the betterment of you, it's a helpmate opposite you, someone who can tell you things that nobody else can in a unique situation. If you can gain that, then you are going to increase joy. You're going to increase joy not only for yourself, for your partner, but for people all around you who know that there are certain things that are solid and sanctified in our culture.
So I'm glad you used that last word. I wanted to unpack a few things that you had mentioned. And thank you so much for this. And disagreeing about the idea that marriage is hated. We didn't use the word holiness at all. You use it at the end, and sanctified. But we used to talk about something called holy matrimony. Well, we don't. Part of it is because we are a sacerdotal nation and no longer a sacred nation. We tend to move towards the either the disbelief in God, or to negate it, in the sense that we're a secular society today. Even though from Thanksgiving until January 2nd or 3rd, there's a lot of thought about God and such, but hey, that's just good for sales and such, and PR. I want to ask you, because you mentioned specifically the divorce rate, because I think we've discussed it before, and you were adamant that it's not as high as people think. People bandy about the term, the divorce rate is at least 50%. And you have educated us saying, no, it's not. Okay, maybe high, it's in the 40s, but it's not 50. Do you have a sense of what it is?
Get married. A first marriage for both partners has a 70% chance of lasting until one of the partners dies.
I'm sorry, it has a 70%?
70% if it's a first marriage for both partners.
So in other words, divorce rate is only 30%.
Yeah, I mean, now a lot of people who get divorced have multiple divorces. So the numbers don't reflect what happens for individuals.
Right. So the numbers of people getting divorced, yes. As I told you before, I have a friend who's what I call a serial monogamist. He's married 5 times, and he claims that he still loves each one of his previous wives. That's a different story. The other issue you mentioned quite strongly, and it's true, is the idea of commitment. Commitment is the sine qua non of marriage, of of a relationship. It's not that, gee, we're in love or in lust now, and 2 years later, well, yeah, that was then, this is now, et cetera, et cetera. That's not marriage. That's not what we want to think about for ourselves and others. But you mentioned about a fear. Now I'm going to ask you, just because we want to go a little deeper, is about fear of losing oneself in a marriage. Is that a false fear?
Well, I think it depends on the individual. If one really has that fear, then maybe one doesn't have a strong sense of self, and that can be explored. However, the chance of losing yourself in a marriage is only a function of the people involved. Unfortunately, I've counseled people where one of the partners was a narcissist and smothered the other person. And there are cases where people can lose themselves out of fear of the other person. And those are sad, terrible cases. But I think that people have choices day to day, every day. You can choose how you act in whatever situation you find yourself with your partner. And as long as you are committed to communicating and committed to working through problems and have different strategies, or if you don't have them, go to a counselor and get them, then you don't have to worry about losing yourself. You only have to worry about how to apply these strategies that can get you through the position that you're in into something that is more positive.
So just to belabor this, and then we want to hear from Maura and Lori. Was that person, I don't know, man or woman, was that person a narcissist? I presume the person was a narcissist before they got married. In other words, marriage brought out, excuse the expression, the worst in them and became, but it wasn't seen before by the other person?
No, narcissists have amazing ways to be agreeable and be pleasant and put on a false front. And then once they marry the person, a different side comes through that is just amazingly intolerable. I've heard some stories I won't repeat because they're just unbearably horrible.
Oof.
So narcissism is a serious problem, and it has to be dealt with straight on. And in many cases, it's usually the man who's the narcissist, not the woman. I often have had to tell women to get away because they are being so mistreated by that kind of husband. Now, I have to say, it's not a common thing. Not
Right.
that people
But,
are
by the
narcissists.
way, we're talking to thousands of people around the world. It's not common.
It's not common.
Not
But
common.
But on the other hand, imperfect marriages are everywhere and including every marriage. There are times in every marriage where there are problems, and there are times in every marriage where one person feels smothered and where the other person is going to be shining, or where one gives of oneself in order to allow the other person to continue a goal or to make some progress. And so, as I said, marriage is not a static thing. The commitment may be static behind it, but what happens in a marriage depends on the children, depends on what life throws at you, depends on losing a job, depends on what you want to do, which may be different from what you wanted to do. So it is something whereby, just as an individual has to face changes, a couple has to face changes. And they can do it together better than they can alone.
On that high note, that was wonderful. And people can do things together oftentimes better than you can alone because life happens, right? Wonderful, Maura. So here's the question again. I'm going to reframe it. This 100 plus people said either themselves or people around them hate marriage. Do you see that? Do you feel it? Do you think, what do you think about it?
You know, yesterday when you texted all three of us, I'm looking at the word and the dictionary, and first I'm thinking misogynist, and I'm like, no, that's not it. And I thought, I never knew there was such a word. So I really appreciate even the time you took at the beginning of this webinar to set the table and give us a little history. Barry, I'm unfamiliar with that concept that people hate marriage. Now, I'm sure that there are people out there here and there for one reason or another. Maybe some people have been disgusted by their parents' marriage or have been abused in their own. It's like the woman who's been maybe raped. She decides she's going to give up all men. But I'm unaware of it as a social thing right now. A couple of things came to mind when you started going back into the Old Testament, and you said there were so few references made to marriage. I thought, really? but something came to mind. Now, our daughter, I brought her up and we used to read the Bible. In fact, we used to read the Aramaic, so I could get back into the roots of it. When she's married, she'll be married 3 years right now, coming up on the end of the year. Unbelievably happy. I mean, she and her husband are very much like me and mine. She never dated, never was interested. She said, Mom, I don't want to waste my time or put anybody on if they, if I don't plan on marrying them. But when she met the man who's currently her husband, we were talking about this. And I thought, I'm hearing her coming back to me. She said, Mom, you're asking me to get married. She said, do you realize you're the one who told me there's no record in Genesis of Adam and Eve ever getting married? And I laughed. I said, well, Kaylee, I did tell you that. And she said, Mom, it's just a social construct. And here's why I want to zero in on this. I said, Kaylee, it may be that. I said, but when you and your future husband if you decide to have children, I said, there is a commitment in the middle of that marriage, when you're married, that tells your children, we are here for you. We are here as one, and we are a foundation point that you're going to live under and live with. And I said, Kaylee, why do you think you grew up feeling so secure? And she's listening to me, and sure enough, the two of them got married. They're delighted. But I think that unlike in the past, where all the music back in the 50s, the 60s, it was all about getting married, finding that one person, putting the ring on. In fact, if you were 30 years old and unmarried years ago, you were a social outcast. So there was so much of that. And I'm very happy today that we don't have that kind of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was a terrible sense of being not invited to the party if you were either not married or divorced. So I think there's just a good place for people to be happy where they are. I would not say, though, that there is a hatred of marriage. I just don't see it. I may say that there is a lack of focus on the value and values of marriage and what it brings to children, what it brings to individuals, what it brings to the larger community. We don't have facets and places, other than maybe, let's say, in certain religious circles, that really put an emphasis on the benefits of marriage. And because of that, I would say not that there's a hatred of marriage, there's a lack of awareness and a lack of appreciation for the values that come out of marriage. So that's how I would rephrase it. Who those people are that hate it, I would just say that comes from a bad experience or possibly having been told by somebody else it's a terrible thing, stay away from it.
So this is really important, some of these points that you mentioned. And you're right, for your wonderful daughter, she could feel so empowered and capable in her own being because of you and your husband. I mean, that's a genius, as Diane mentioned also. The couple become a model for children in the sense that there is stability. Because let's be blunt, life is an ocean. There's stuff happening all the time. One never knows. You get cancer. I mean, cancer. We know it happens, right? Just like that. Friends of mine. Actually, Diane, I'll mention to you. I'm sorry to say it in public like this, but you should know. Remember the Alperts?
Sure, of course.
Right. They were supposed to come to America because one of their sons got married to a woman from Houston. So they were going to come to America right now for December 9th or so, like that. And I just got a call from one of our mutual friends that their 18-year-old son just was rushed to the hospital with leukemia. I mean, just, you never know. Or as Diane mentioned, I was standing up in the morning, I'm paralyzed in the evening. Thank God my wife still liked me and she didn't leave, because it did happen. I had many stories of people that were in paralysis and such, and spouse couldn't handle it. So you're right in the sense that you gave Kaylee that ability to be strong enough to decide. And yes, Adam and Eve didn't get married. They didn't have to. There's nobody else around. according to the biblical account, of course. What else you going to do? Who else you going to go out with? I don't like her. Well, sorry, that's what it is. I will mention to you two things that also were fascinating when I did some research. You'll all laugh at this. Apparently, before 1960, 40% of all marriages were what we call shotgun marriages.
Mm.
Yeah, they got married because, well, it's better to get married than expect a child in the next few months. So people got married out of necessity, as it were. And you're right, it was a time. It is much better today. The undue social pressures that existed then that were not beneficial in causing harmony, in causing this ability. Remember, I said that the greatest skill of marriage is wisdom. Well, it's very hard to have wisdom when you're dealing with untoward situations that didn't really work and you didn't want them to work. And by the way, those days also, it was much harder to have an escape valve that we call divorce. In other words, divorce with integrity or divorce under good situations. So there are many, many more benefits to the societal process that we have today, vis-a-vis interactions between man and wife and husband and wife and husband and whatever people call themselves. And it goes to, again, what you said, wonderful Diane, about commitment. Commitment is the key. And commitment is really something that enables people to communicate. So this is a great segue for wonderful Lori, because she's the wife expert. She's been through stuff. And I'm going to pose the question again to you, Lori, and because I don't know, you deal with a lot of people in difficult circumstances that are going through stuff. Do you feel in any way, or do people speak to you in any way about this, that there's a hatred of marriage?
No. What I get is a lot of people wish they knew how to do it, or that they married somebody. They thought the person they were getting married to would just be a great husband or wife. And then they realized, now that they're older and they look at their partner and they look at their partner's parents who divorced when their husband or wife was young, how did they even learn to have a relationship? They didn't have any role models. And so if you don't have any role models, you don't know how to be a husband or a wife because you haven't seen it done before. You see what's on TV, you think, oh, that's how I'll do it. And that's not really, plausible. But what I find interesting is my kids, given everything that we've been through, have said, I'm never getting married. It's so complicated. It's just easier to be by yourself. And then I have friends who've been divorced or their husbands has passed away and they're terrified to get old alone, which is, I think about like, well, I could do it. But then I really think about how much I share with my partner. I mean, he does the laundry, I do the cooking, he pays half the bills, I pay the other half. We have this like partnership. Whereas if I have been by myself for a while, it's really hard. It's really hard to feed a bunch of people or even yourself. And having that, like, I coach women who are, 60 and their husband leaves them and all their kids are gone and they have no one to eat with. It is a lonely existence. And human beings need other humans. People need people. And we are not
Who need people.
we are not meant to be alone. In fact, one of my favorite shows, don't laugh, was this show on, I think, Showtime or HBO. It was called Big Love. And it was about a man named Big,
BIGLOV.
yeah. And it was about a man who had a wife and he got another wife and they were polygamists. And I was watching the show going, wouldn't that be really cool to have the women around to do half the housework? And all these children that like had each other to hang out and everyone's getting along and they all sat at a huge table. Kids love other kids when they're growing up. It was like amazing. And the only thing that was kind of complicated was at nighttime you had to switch bedrooms. But that leaving that part out, it's a good system. And these women have each other to have like as besties. And then they had this other show called Sister Wives, and that was just a really weird situation. But I really enjoyed that show, Big Love. It showed me another side of that. And I thought, I can see how that happens, except for like I said, the sex part. But I fantasize, because men die early, that women, having a community of women to live together as they age without their kids or their husbands would be a really cool thing. So I just got off of marriage, but I do believe in marriage. And I think it's a great way that you can find out how to make yourself better, because your reflection back shows you all the things that are wrong with you. That's what I have found in marriage. If you want to know who you really are, ask your partner. They know all the terrible things that you got to fix.
So this is really important as a point that Diane mentioned about the narcissist. And part of the, I guess, the issue with a narcissist is that a narcissist, almost by definition, will not ask, how do I make myself better? I can't be. I'm already the best there is. I mean, I'm making it up. I guess that's how people think. And yet the real genius of life is asking that question. How do I make myself better? In other words, on a selfish level, how do I make myself better? Now, the benefit of all that is if I'm better, then the person I'm with can be better. In other words, it just gets better and better, right? Isn't better than not being better? Well, that's the genius of marriage. The whole point of it is, again, I use the word wisdom, is that you actually can gain wisdom. Let's be blunt. Those of us who married, let's say, I was 29. So a lot of people get married later these days than before. But there are still a number of people who get married between the ages of 20 and 25. They're puppies. They know nothing about life. No matter what they think they know, they don't know anything. You can't. It's not possible unless you're really open to studying wisdom. But if you are committed, as Diane mentioned, to communicating and building, then stuff that's good can happen no matter the outside forces. The inside is going to be strong. The outside, okay, there's a hurricane, there's a tornado, there's floods. Okay, yes, and therefore what? Okay, but look what we're doing. Just as long as we're together, it doesn't matter at all. I want to make mention something you did also. You spoke about, Lori, about TV. And so you're just watching this big club. And so we don't have a TV, haven't had one for decades. And Diane and Michael don't have a TV. Well, I think he watches it in the closet sometimes because he has to. He's coming out of the closet. Okay. But there was this TV influence in America. There was a show that I know existed called Little House on the Prairie, something like that. So, it depicted a something. Okay, well, that wasn't reality. And then you had, when I was growing up, Farther Knows Best. Well, I mean, it's very nice, but it's not reality. Archie Bunker was closer to reality, even though that wasn't reality either. But the point is that when you're watching TV, you're watching somebody else's attempt to depict what it is that you are living in your life, in contradistinction to what we're mentioning, Laurie, about living by oneself. Because people do need people. People love people, right? And when you're dealing with people, you're not dealing just with that marriage, husband, wife, whatever the two people are, and the children. It's called an extended family, right? Because he or she has a family, and then you have friends who become part of family, and then school becomes part of a family. In other words, these things all gather benefit when you're in what we call a marriage situation. And if you do, unfortunately, go into or fall into or whatever happens called divorce, that shatters a lot of stuff, not just for the kids. And by the way, we know, I think we know this, Diane, you'll have to correct us if it's not true, that kids growing up in a divorce situation have a greater tendency to be divorced themselves. I mean, we know it by, unfortunately, child abuse or beatings and things like that. That kind of trauma carries through. So the ability to avoid the trauma, like you mentioned, Lori, I mean, you had trauma. You went through stuff with your marriage. And thank God you're on the other side now. And nobody wants that stuff, but it's probably stronger today because of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what you wouldn't ask for it. If you had a menu, you wouldn't have checked that off.
No, in fact, if I knew this was going to happen, I don't think I would have gotten married. Like, if I knew this was what was going to happen, I'm not sure I would have said yes.
Okay, so
But
this is very
I
nice.
went through it.
No,
I went through it.
this is great because I thank God I'm blessed to have a couple other webinars I do, and I interact with a lot of people who are under the age of 30. And I got to tell you, I listen to them just because I want to hear. They're very vocal about things like, no, who needs to get married? I mean, there's just so much I can do. All right, I have a friend, I have a girlfriend, I can travel there, I can do. Just there's no need. And yet, part of it is they don't realize that people need people, and that the loneliness factor is real. But by the same token, you can't be married to somebody who Diane mentioned, narcissist or trauma. I mean, I'm going to say it. I'm not mentioning a name, so I can say it. But I have somebody in our family. I just found out from my sister that these two people have one child, about to have another, and they can't get along. They yell at each other. My sister was visiting them for Thanksgiving. They yell at each other. I mean, to me, it doesn't compute. I don't understand it. If my wife and I don't get along, she goes silent. That's a different story. But the yelling at each other and insulting each other, what a horrible way to live, right? So I want to make mention, because our time is very short here, but I want to tell you how au courant we are. Because the Senate of the United States of America, which I guess used to be a great deliberative body, I think it's lost a lot of its class and shine and such. But it did do something just the other day, and it passed a bill, I think it was just 2 days ago, that is called the Respect for Marriage Act. And it's interesting in the sense of two pieces. Number one, on the surface, it looks very good. It just says people can get married. It doesn't any genders can marry any gender. That's it. There's no difference between a man and a woman getting married than a man and a man, a woman, etc. Nobody mentioned yet of marrying a horse or anything like that, but that could come in another 2 decades. And by the way, when I say it, I do not mean to be just tongue in cheek, because again, we're seeing things that are craziness has happened before. But the point of my discussion here is that it wasn't just that there's a new act, Respect for Marriage Act, which in itself, the wording is great. But what it did is it repealed a previous law. And the previous law was was called Defense of Marriage Act. That was, I think, in force for 40 years, plus minus. And that was a law that said, I don't know why it had to be a law. People got very upset, I guess. There had to be the law that a marriage is only between a man and a woman. Now, in my humble opinion, you didn't need the law. People do what they do. So it was sort of not necessary then. And I don't know why we needed a law now to repeal that and have a new one saying people can get married. Because unless I'm wrong, I think you can get married in almost every state in the country. Maybe there are some that not. That's up to the state. But there's no difference in a marriage if you use Diane's pathway, that marriage is commitment. To use what Laura said, is that the ability to understand and get better with oneself, and what Lori said, like you just mentioned, to make oneself better. That's really what marriage is all about. What's the difference if there are two people of the same gender? Yeah, it doesn't push my button, but that doesn't matter. You don't need a law for it. That's what I'm saying. So but also saying that I want you, my three partners in this, to feel very, very how should you say it, enlightened and happy that we're on the leading edge of societal evolution, as somebody used to say. I forget who said that, one of the radio show, talk show hosts. But we're on the leading edge of societal evolution. In other words, when we're discussing here marriage and all these aspects of it, this is not just because we have a webinar and we like to talk. We're giving people something really important, fundamental, and I got to tell you, because I get the emails, people really love this. So I want to say now, we'll have another one before the end of the year. I want to say a huge thank you to you, Diane, and you, Maura, and you, Lori, for making the time, your thoughts, your energy, your input, your transformative understanding of life to be able to share with you. So, anyway, it's okay. So on that happy note, we're coming to the end of this particular hour. We have one more session now for the year of 22. And I think next time we're going to discuss some really leading edge stuff again. They got lots of emails we didn't get to yet, and they're really fascinating. People open up when they send this stuff to us because they don't have to put their names. And it's just absolutely wonderful when we're talking about people's real lives, right? So again, a huge thank you to us and the people watching and listening. They appreciate it. And of course, as we like to do, we go out with a hug, especially this time of year. Heartfelt, unlimited giving. So on the count of three, if we can. 1, 2, 3. Best wishes, everybody. Bye. Welcome to Marriage with Joy, which is the most open discussion on the internet about the positive, purposeful, powerful, pleasant aspects of living in harmony with matrimony. Marriage with Joy unabashedly discusses the most interesting questions raised by listeners. Our informed and informative panel addresses issues with thought, wit, and aplomb. Voted best of the web 2 years running.